Hello, and welcome to Sacred Scars, Stories of Religious Trauma and Healing, the space where we explore the intricate journey of healing from religious trauma. Before we delve into today's episode, we want to offer a brief disclosure. This podcast addresses sensitive and potentially activating topics related to religious trauma. We understand that these conversations can be challenging, and the content may evoke strong emotions. It's important to prioritize your mental and emotional well-being. If you find that the discussions in this episode resonate deeply or stir difficult emotions or feelings, we encourage you to practice self-care. This might look like taking a break, reaching out to a supportive friend or family member, or seeking professional help such as therapy or spiritual direction. Throughout our exploration of religious trauma and healing, our goal is to foster understanding, empathy, and growth. We believe in the power of shared stories and hope that together we can create a supportive community. Thank you for joining us in this journey. Now let's get started with today's episode on religious trauma and mental health through a queer perspective with Kerrick and Mellie, whom I'll have introduce themselves.
Okay, I'm Kerrick. I use they and he pronouns. I am in the contemplative psychotherapy program at Naropa, finishing my last semester for LPC counselor tract. And I work at Queer Asterisk in there as an intern and intern counselor, and have started a group with Mellie on religious trauma in that context. And it's become my reality tunnel, and everything to veer towards is queer religious trauma, understanding kind of that's my thesis. I'm like kind of trying to understand the specificity of queer religious trauma and what that means, how that's caused specifically, and then how that can be worked with specifically. And then holding groups is kind of my favorite thing right now. And so I'm kind of setting up my private practice to start in the summer, to try and hopefully provide that as like a community for queer religious trauma support and study and research. And I study mostly contemplative psychotherapy, which is basically based around secular Buddhist kind of ideals of creating curiosity and collaboration with clients to kind of move towards that inner wisdom, which I think is really, a huge antidote to what can, be a lot of religious trauma. It's that like inner wisdom piece. Yeah.
Nice. And Mellie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Mellie. I use they, them pronouns. I've been with Queer Asterisk since January 2022. I started as a prac student and then did my internship and stayed on after finishing grad school. And so I do group facilitating, also still do some one-on-one counseling, but since doing more groups and all of the writing that we have to do for grad school, I have found that my passion is really in writing and, the more creative side of things that I like to spend my time with that more so than counseling. So I have only just a handful of clients in that aspect. But yeah, I've identified as queer pretty much since I hit puberty, but I kind of kept that private because I did grow up in such a religious environment. And it wasn't until I felt safe enough to come out did I really start to unpack the religious trauma that I kind of always knew was there. Um, but it wasn't really clear how ingrained it was in me. And and how many different facets of my life it had affected me until studying mental health and really unpacking all of those layers. Um, and so I started, as I noticed it within myself, I started noticing it a little bit more in some of my clients, where they would say certain things, and I would ask, did you happen to grow up in like a religious environment? And I started noticing that there was a lot of people in the queer community and trans community that have religious trauma and hadn't ever really thought of it as religious trauma. I thought, oh, like this is just kind of what it is, or oh, well, like I'm not religious, but my parents were, and so there was that separation of it of like, oh, that's this other thing, and I really want to focus on this facet of my life, but to focus on this facet of their lives, they would have to also kind of unpack some of that religious trauma as well. So um, I'd been thinking about starting a support group for religious trauma for quite some time. And finally, my supervisor was like, you know what, we're just going to do it. And so they got me in contact with Kerrick, and we kind of brought our heads together and started this group. And it was pretty much immediately when we advertised for it, we were really surprised at how much interest it was getting and how many people were coming forward and saying, like, I've been struggling with this literally my whole life, and I've never been able to openly talk about it. Some are still close to their family members, and so they don't really want to talk about it. And then there's some that are completely estranged from their family because of it, like myself, and it's hard to talk about. So it's been very eye-opening having this experience with this support group and seeing, like I said, like how it really affects so many different facets of your life, even down to your sense of self and your autonomy and how you show up in the world, and that kind of overlaps with how we look at gender and sexuality and queerness and all of that. So
Yeah. So I'm hearing a lot of lived experience, but also finding it like really fulfilling hearing from other folks and building a community aspect and like joining in conversation about religious trauma.
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's wild to, I mean, it's awful. It's awful and it's amazing. I mean, if that makes sense. Like I think it filled up in 2 days, our first group. And just for reference, like a lot of the groups struggle to get, people and how are we going to market this? How are we going to do this? And it was just like this word of mouth, like thing that kind of just popped really fast. And we were like, okay, what? We're like, okay, well, we need to start a wait list. Okay, we got a wait list now. Okay, we gotta try to do a second group. So we're starting our second group now, and um, hopefully keep it ongoing. But yeah, it's made me like really inspired and like kind of mind blown of like what it is to engage with that, and yeah, just like thinking now, like okay, yeah, it's a huge part of my life. Just the back, a little more background of just like, yeah, I was raised in Methodist. I was confirmed Methodist at 10, and had yeah, just a very very closed circuit of information of connection to the outside world, really, and till I was about 14, and went to public school for the first time at 14, and um, started having those like cognitive dissonance moments. Just like, okay, well, all of these people are wrong, I guess, because or stuff like that that just started hitting me of like, okay, like I would bring my Bible to school, to high school, to public school, and get bullied, and these moments of just like, this is what they talk about when I'm hearing like persecution or I'm hearing these things, and then there's something that just didn't fit. Something was like, okay, but I'm also just like talking to these people, and it was just this creation of that dissonance for a little while, I think, and then um, something in the vein of like um, just those whatever it was that couldn't be swallowed, or couldn't be, just bypassed out or whatever. um for me, it was like, yeah, that essentially everybody else is kind of inherently wrong if I'm right, and that there was something there that didn't fit. And um the answers that were, from my I started going to like more of the non-denominational at like maybe 13, 12, and my parents joined like that church. I think is a way to connect with more what was going on with me and stuff too. And yeah, it was like something about that drive of like, well, okay, like, um, what do I do with these questions that were, yeah, I don't know if you all had that experience, but just like certain questions that seem like we don't ask those questions or something was the answer, almost like, oh, well, that's just something you take to God or something. And I was like, okay, well, I kind of doing that. And it feels like this is the answer is like, I was born in a certain place with a certain language in a certain context and that doesn't feel like it makes me empirically right to determine other people's salvation. And they'd be like, "Well, you just gotta pray harder and dig deeper, and you'll find your way," and all those things. And yeah, I think there's yeah, a continued like self negation. I think that happened until um and I think healing it for me was, yeah, those first intellectual moments of like, this can't be true if this is true, or like whatever. And like, and then many years later having a realization that like still stuff is living in my body, and like my body's still holding all of these this really binary thinking, this kind of like shame around sexuality, and like um kind of a lot of secrecy, and like in the same way I feel like was coming from you know yeah, just like this sense of like this something fundamentally in me isn't okay. And um wasn't ever really able to challenge any of that stuff until I started doing deeper like trauma therapy and work in my own life. And was like, okay, well, I thought I overcame this in a way that I beat it logically or something. And that just turned out not to be accurate. It was not entirely true. And yeah, so realizing the journey's a lot deeper into um having a body, being a body, like having a what trauma is, and how to um yeah, how to understand like um yeah, those deeper narratives that I was still carrying, that I weren't really mine, but I was still, yeah, they were still there, still running part of the show. And yeah.
Yeah. I like the fact that you like involve the body
Mm,
because
mhm.
it's like a whole body thing and like a whole self.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, there's a huge part of my program has been um, kind of doing our own. We go on meditation retreats within this program, and we do a lot of like embodiment meditations and like brutal kind of long form sitting, and um, a lot of just like this. Okay, holding the hypothesis that like sitting with different forms of pain can create more awareness and compassion in it. And finding the edges of that, like what's actually me being unkind to myself versus like what's part of me sitting with my own pain can be really kind to myself. And those are such hard like lines, and they're so individual, and healing is so individual. And just like that's as a therapist, that's my kind of idea, is that I don't have the right answer coming into anything. I can help build relationship and help build possibilities for people to move towards themselves. And that's the only thing I feel like I'm ever going to want to try to do as a therapist. um yeah, and it's been really inspiring to be like in that program. um Europa's got its own problems, and so does career asterisk, I think, if I'm being honest. And I think every system is a system in its own way. And I think made of people, and those people I think are all coming from almost everybody coming from such good intention and such good lived experience and embodiment in those ways too. It's been really inspiring to be around all those people. Yeah.
So, what has brought both of you into like mental health practices and healing from your own traumas and being like present for your own communities? It's a loaded question.
Hmm. Yeah, Melly, you go first.
Oh, thank you. Well, to follow up a little bit, Kerrick, what you were saying about, doing somatic work within the body and sitting with previous experiences and emotions, that is challenging. It's challenging, for anyone to do. It's also challenging as a therapist doing it with a client because a lot of times it's not going to be a positive experience. Sometimes it's actually going to be very uncomfortable. Um, and especially for, I would say, mostly for myself, but I've also seen this in some of the clients that I've worked with when you've been raised in an environment that multiple people have told you to not trust your own intuition, to go against your autonomy,
Mm.
to not listen to what your body is telling you because your body can mislead you or your body can be overtaken by the enemy or whatever, to now try and do that as an adult in the presence of someone who's almost like a stranger, pretty much, um, it can bring up a lot of different emotional responses. I've personally experienced rage, everything from rage to an overwhelming sadness when I check in with my inner child around that. All of the times that I knew what my body needed and was told not to listen to myself. And so now trying to bypass that in my mind is challenging. I think even for therapists, when you have more tools than the average person, and you've gone through grad school and read all these books and written all these papers, it's still like there's this feeling of I should know how to get myself through this. Why is it still challenging? Um, I talk other people through it, but I still struggle to talk myself through it. And that's how deeply ingrained some of that conditioning from childhood can be, even down into like the subconscious level of the mind. Um, and this is kind of what we were talking about in our group yesterday, actually. Someone asked, I just want to know, like, what is it supposed to look like when, I'm healing or I'm healed? What am I looking for? What does that look like? And I said, that's the thing. You're never going to wake up one day and be, oh, I'm healed. It's all gone. Doesn't affect me at all in any way, shape, or form now. Healing is unfortunately a never ending process. And I don't, as a therapist, I never want to tell someone, oh, it gets easier or oh, it gets better, because I don't ever want to give someone false hope. It's all I can guarantee is here are the tools and the resources that I used that helped me, and I hope that they can help you. And ultimately, you have you. I'm just here as a facilitator. I'm just a passenger, right? The client is the driver. They're the one in the driver's seat. It's ultimately up to them. I'm just along for the ride for a little bit. Um, and I think that is also another struggle I've seen in people that have experienced religious trauma is that difficulty in trusting themselves.
Yeah.
But as long as you trust yourself, there's so many different things out there, so many different resources now. Thankfully, as time goes on, we do have more books and podcasts and information that people can find, but having that sense of safety and trust within yourself will help you to discern what's going to help you and what's going to benefit you and what can just kind of take a back burner for now.
Mhm.
Make a lot of really good points, especially the like being there and like trusting yourself, especially with religious trauma, because it seems like a lot of folks who have experienced religious trauma struggle to with trust themselves in their healing process
Mm.
because for so many years they've had this like other power telling them who and how to trust.
Mhm.
That's a huge part of yeah, and I know your previous topic about with it being about politics too, and just like I think that sense of like what we're seeing with that and just like giving away our rights or giving away autonomy to these people who are going to save us or people that are of God or of whatever, and seeing um how that's playing out in different ways over the past like 10 years and like what it looks like now. And now it's continually now for me seeing like it just seems like a continued theme of beyond what I thought it would be. And so it's scary in a way, but it's also just like that's um it makes I think my continued like level of like just what is it to like sit in the unknown for things or with everything. I think that can help relationally with people. I think it can help it's helped in my life to understand my own like mental health struggles, my um experience with drugs, like you know attachment wounds, like all of these things. I'm just like, okay, like um certainty is like the antidote that I think religion provides in some ways is certainty. And one thing I've been researching with my thesis is like the questions that I guess this is more of a philosophical belief that I have of like I think they're um straight up like birthright questions of being a human, of just like, what am I doing here? Who am I? What's my purpose? What is death? Like all these things. And I really come to love like secular, non-sectarian Buddhism that kind of holds these questions and says like, yeah, like getting just naturally to the inner part of yourself. There's questions, or there's and the need to collapse them to an answer is part of working with suffering. It's like that craving energy. Like I need this to be solved because I can't sit with it. I can't find a way to be with that uncertainty. And something in that for me is that's been super corrective. Just like learning that like confidence in myself. Like I can sit with deeper levels of discomfort. I can sit with and like I can kind of do it too well too. On the other side, I can sit with discomfort way past a point that's helpful, and like so okay, let's reel that back. Like what's the actual point? Is the point to kind of numb myself to everything? And that's what I originally thought was like Buddhism. Like I'm just going to be numb, I'm going to be completely detached, I'm not going to feel pain. um and I don't think that's I think that's possible, and I think that's also possible with drugs or anything. I just that's the same goal I think that I was seeking when I was trying to find coping skills for not feeling because it's one thing to try to get rid of the pain versus like what you're also getting rid of is the ability to feel joy and surprise and excitement and um love at deeper levels of like love itself, love of others. um Yeah, I don't know. There's something about like, yeah, that feeling of birthright. I'm like, these questions were not available for me until I was probably, yeah, like 15, 16. And I don't know, developmentally, I think it is like something that happens um, when there's like, what is the answer that your parents give? Is it, I don't know. I don't know what happens. What do you think happens? Or is it like, we know what happens. This is exactly what happens. You don't ever have to worry about that. You say, "Oh, good, okay, crazy." That would have been really hard to not know. Um, I don't know. So there's something in the research that I'm looking at with that sense too of like what is the attachment levels and like the attachment wounds and developmental wounds around that of just like um, yeah, the way we would look at other childhood trauma too, of just like, well, someone was not validated or not emotionally not helped to have emotional regulation, at that age. Kids don't have the ability until their brains just aren't developed enough to create an understanding of like, oh, my parent is deficient and can't hold their own emotional well-being in hand, and so they can't hold mine either. Kids just don't have that ability. And so a lot of Gabe Monte's work is on that, like childhood trauma and childhood attachment wounds, and like, yeah, really, like that whole thing of like, we turn it inward. We immediately, that's what happens as a child. It's actually more painful and detrimental for a child to say my caregiver can't is not what I need. It's way less painful to say I'm not what I need. I got to change me. I got to do something about this version of me that's not acceptable. Um, and I do think like the obvious parallel there of like how religion creates that same exact storyline um, I don't know exactly where that came from, but to me that feels like it's a very old control based religion as a war machine, religion as a political engine, and all that for how to control population and society over the course of generations. um, and yeah, I don't know, that's a lot of thoughts there, but yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah. Religion and politics do mirror each other a lot in terms of power.
Yeah, power and control, like
Yeah.
who's and yeah, power, pressure, and control. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Mhm.
And so I kind of like the childhood development part of spirituality, those thoughts and stuff. So like, are you saying, just trying to clarify, like, so lack of like spiritual engagement or development could be like some kind of neglect,
Mm. Um,
or am I just jumping there?
you might be jumping. I mean, there's something in the vein there of like what is neglect, I guess.
Yeah.
I think more I was leaning towards the idea of like um yeah, like I think the operative methods of like how religion can become a self-shame machine. I think that's like the thing is that's I don't think that is a super talked about part, and that's I think it does get passed down um as a generative like mode of here's how we're gonna be okay is if we have to basically pass this shame down to our children and pass this sense of genuine unworthiness um, at a fundamental level. And again, I do think that that's just a hypothesis at best. I think it's a possibility, sure, um, and I just think that that's a from my experience and my own like positionality and biases from growing up in that way, I mostly see the harm and how that gets passed down. Same similar to yeah, just like emotional stuntedness that gets passed down. And like they always say, I think trauma therapists always talk about like the intergenerational stuff. It's like, well, whatever your parents didn't deal with is what you get to deal with, and for on and on and on. And it's like whatever it is, um, yeah, it's yeah, it gets another chance to be worked through in a new generation. Um, and yeah,
Yeah, so it's the inherited trauma. I almost said drama, but trauma.
you both, yeah.
So I also think that it could go in the other direction where um is it possible that because of neglect, someone could be like underdeveloped spiritually? I think it's also possible that someone could be very aware spiritually because of neglect. Um,
Mm.
that's kind of my experience as a child. I dealt with a lot of neglect. But I always felt this very spiritual connection with earth and with nature and with water, um, with my dreams, things like that. I always had this awareness that we feel like we're alone, but we never really are alone. You know, we are separate and connected all at once. And I don't know if I would have had that strong of an awareness of it since childhood if I didn't spend so much time alone.
Mm.
I like that. So it's a very contemplative in terms of spending a lot of time alone with thoughts and exploring like the world and connection around you.
Yeah. It also kind of touches on a little bit of Kerrick, what you were saying a minute ago about detachment or like the idea of detachment. It's like I just want to be numb and feel nothing. And it's like, that realistically is so not the human experience. Like we are here to feel. But in the sense that everything we feel we're sort of observing, not letting it completely control everything. And so I really started to kind of sit more with that when I came across DBT and radical acceptance, and
Mhm.
the idea that radical acceptance is not ignoring your emotional response to whatever has happened or not happened, but it's just accepting this is what has happened and it's not the end of the world. This is my response to it. This is how I can see it and I can sit with it and then from that place choose where to go with this.
I love that. I love DBT as well. I'm starting a spiritual engagement group myself at the place that I work at with incorporating a lot of DBT practices.
Mm.
As it can be, ex wow, words are skipping my mouth today. It can be like really fulfilling in terms of someone's spiritual growth, the radical acceptance, the DBT, and like especially the mindfulness aspect of DBT.
Mhm.
Love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. What? I was just gonna say, like, in my own personal experience, I felt that DBT was far more helpful than CBT as I was kind of working through really unpacking some of that religious trauma.
Yeah. And for listeners who don't know what DBT and CBT stand for, DBT is dialectic behavioral therapy, and CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. And I've read some articles about like CBT potentially being dismissive of people's traumas and how it is developed. So it's always something to use with caution when working with folks who have experienced trauma because it can be very dismissive, very gaslighty.
Mhm.
Especially in the context of complex trauma. Yep. Which
Mhm.
you, if there was complex trauma in the DSM, and I think religious trauma would be right there with it. It's so close in the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, I've
Mhm.
had so many grudges with the DSM and APA about.
Yeah. Well, and my activism version of this is like I hope to create some way of like efficacy. I don't know if that's gonna be my path or not, honestly, but um it's inspiring to speak to people like you and like are yeah, it just feels like there's a lot of potential around like, okay, yeah, we can see like especially what you're talking about with like the harm of what ends up being gaslighting. Yeah. I mean, I've experienced that in my own therapy when I was younger because I didn't have the language to even understand what was happening. And so for someone to just say, well, it sounds like this is happening, you're like, okay. And I'm like, yeah, I guess I'll do this. I'll take meds for this. I'll do this thing. And I just didn't know any better. I didn't know my own nervous system. I didn't know how much I couldn't even bring myself into therapy. I didn't even know how to be in therapy for a long time. And have curiosity and have a deeper relationship. You know, I don't know. So I just feel like there's so much there of like what in the future DSM-6 could look like, whatever. And I just don't know. I don't know. Was it like 2013 or 2015 that the last DSM came out, maybe, or something? Or
I think it was like around the time that I was finishing high school, maybe. So maybe it was 2013.
okay, yeah, which is kind of fucking crazy to think about how much has like gone on since then of like queer theory, critical race theory, all of the context of like the aftermath of like COVID, but even before that, like just the Trumpian era and like how much I do think that there's been a lot of catalysts for I don't know, society getting worse to get better or something like that. And I don't know how to look at it as a whole like that, but like that works for some people and some people it doesn't. So as a society, I just don't know if it getting worse will help it get better. But it's getting worse. So yeah, I hope that means it gets better. I hope it means there's more. I mean, it does feel like there's more collectivism and intersectionality. I know, Melly, that's your big jam. Just like all of the ways that things intersect and like help each other. My tagline for I'll just drop my non-existent private practice that's starting in the summer. Queer Life Refuge is my idea for therapeutic services and research around specifically queer religious trauma. We heal together. It's my tagline because I'm like, I know that my healing has been entirely dependent on all of the, I'll call it karmic action, but like all of the causation, all of the like ways that I've moved against myself, the ways I've moved towards myself, like all of that. It's all causation. It's all moved me towards where I am now and where I've gotten to be able to help other people. And that's just a unbelievably can't go back kind of vibe of like, well, now that I've seen this and I'm doing this, I know gotta keep going. I don't know.
There's a lot of changes in the field, which is thankfully like well overdue, but like thankfully finally happening.
Yeah.
And there's like something that one of my former professors told me one time because we were like both venting about the DSM, which I absolutely loved that conversation. And he said that if we had a better understanding of trauma, the DSM would likely be a lot smaller.
Yep.
Mhm.
I could not agree with that more.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
so a big part of what I talk about in our first group, in when we are leading these groups, and one of the first things I usually talk about, people are like, "What are you doing? What is that like specifically with religious trauma? Like, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, it to me, like the why is there is like there are so many other symptomologies and diagnoses and ways of looking at pain and suffering and the DSM and the way that differential diagnosis works, and we're all aware, like the goal is to try to be as ethical as possible and try to be as helpful as possible and say, like, can this be better described by something else? So if someone has anxiety and depression, is it depression with anxiety? Is it anxiety with depression? Is it a dissociative disorder that has depressive symptoms, and like I think exactly what you're saying, if we had more context around trauma being what it is, and I mean all the research since this edition has come out, I mean, yeah, trauma being in the body, like symptomology of how we deal with that. And there's like a list of all of the mistaken identities for religious trauma that it's a list of like the most common, um, things, depression. I know grief can be a huge part of it. Anything related to like control, OCD, ODD, and just sorry, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's oh, what else? I had a list here that I was looking
Like,
at.
yeah. Because I did a list not too long ago myself based
Mm,
on I think her name is
yeah,
Marlene.
yeah,
Yeah.
Marlene Marnell. Yeah.
The religious trauma syndrome. And so there's like cognitive effects,
Mhm.
affective functioning, social cultural effects,
Mhm.
and from religious trauma syndrome, which I feel like doesn't have the attraction that it deserves, probably because it was created by someone who's not a cis man, which is my
Yep. Yep.
personal beefs. But
hmm I do not think that's an unreasonable theory by any means.
but yeah, under affective, there's anxiety, panic attacks, depression, suicidal ideation, anger, grief, guilt, loneliness, and lack of meaning.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, yeah, that is it best described by this childhood, very intense, indoctrinative like system. It's like in some situations, it's like absolutely. Um, and instead, we're like medicating or whatever someone for something that's a symptom, not the cause, right? Yeah, yeah,
Or
I
they're
can,
labeled with like a personality disorder.
yeah.
And then they're told, well, because you have this personality disorder, there's actually no medication we can give you, and there's not really much we can do for you.
Mhm.
But this is just your whole personality, and this is what you just got to deal with.
Yep. And there's just that defect language with that.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
you're just defective in some way. Sorry.
and as soon as you get that personality disorder, so many services just like go out the window because so many
Hmm.
people were taught back in the day to avoid personality disorders.
Yep.
Lots of jobs, lots of opportunities. Yep. Even like colleges accepting kids.
Hmm.
Yep. Uh,
Yeah. A personality disorder diagnosis can follow you even if you move out of the state, if you try to move out of the country, it can follow you.
Yeah. It can prevent you from moving to some countries as well.
Hmm.
wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Seems
Yeah. Autism spectrum disorder as well.
I was just gonna say that.
Yeah.
Say I added in that symptoms, I recently made a little PowerPoint that I've been working on for um queer religious trauma, but I added the somatic symptomology as well. Of just like the most common ones, and that's currently what I'm researching. But along with like the cognitive, social, emotional, and cultural, just saying like how is it showing up somatically as a possibility? Because my little is very small, but I was like right now the working definition by disembodiment, chronic pain or illness, um, chronic gut issues, eating disorders, and then yeah, like you mentioned, the self harm and suicidality, and just how we relate to body or how we don't relate to body.
Yeah.
Um, those, yeah,
Dysmorphia is pretty popular as well.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just even yeah, like how long it took for me to engage with my sexuality or gender at all, and then yeah, like the ability to talk to myself about it even after there's thoughts, the ability to like integrate different parts and how long that just took for me to do it, raw dog without any like I didn't even know that was like safe. I was like finally had a partner that I knew was weird. Like we both were just like talking about stuff enough and it just like felt like okay, a little bit more safety every I don't know, a month, something like that. But safety to me is just like the simplest thing, but it's so complex, like how it can deliver that autonomy.
Yeah.
Mm.
And trauma has such a significant impact on that safety marker where folks sometimes need to explore like what consent means to them and looks like to them
Mhm.
Mhm.
and develop like those healthy boundaries and how to advocate for their own consent. But how do you define religious trauma? It's a very broad question.
Do you want me to go first, Melanie? Um, okay, I'll just go.
Oh.
Uh,
Yeah, you go ahead.
It's a hard question. It's
um,
tricky.
yeah, well, so I've been thinking about this an immense amount. That's what I started as my like research question. While kind of was like defining queer religious trauma, defining healing and all these things. So my answer is like kind of a little bit of a convoluted thing, because I do think that in the same way of like looking at it through the queer theory lens, like, well, a definition would be very static. A definition would be very potentially limiting, but also um, I think the benefit to queer theory and like how it's been able to create more hypotheses and like potentiality, and then there's more embracing of newness, embracing of the variations and the complexity and the intersectionality and all this stuff. And it's like, okay, well, this definition works for, um, my positionality of being white, being, socialized male, being neurodivergent, being Buddhist atheist, like having a lot of anti-religious background in like before I became more, I think, gray area with it. Um, and like I realize the more I can get my own shit that's not a part of the definition, the better it's probably going to feel to like make it a definition. But I think that right now where I'm at with it is thinking like it's a working definition entirely. It's constantly and it's got to be in flux. So I think it has to do with obviously like the symptomology and like the um cause and effect vibes. But I think it so far. I would say 50% data and 50% lived experience would be forming a definition. Um, yeah, very unsatisfying answer, I feel like, but I feel like a politician almost. Like I didn't actually answer your question. And I give you a lot of words. No. Um, Yeah, I can say specifically queer religious trauma is what I'm trying to define, and that includes maybe the spectrum of binary thinking has a lot in that when that's like the focus. So like these are the lenses that I'm putting on, like my glasses to look at religious trauma and queer religious trauma, binary thinking, intense binary thinking, um, heaven and hell, good and wrong, safe and unsafe, all these possibilities of it being a gray area between um and I feel like I want to look at my little PowerPoint that I was because I want to not forget. I think in the context of purity culture, what feels like autonomy and bringing one's like how much of the self is allowed basically is the question that I feel like is um there's maybe a way to create a spectrum of that and say like if you're somewhere past this point probably could consider it religious trauma. I know there's talk about adverse religious experience too as another form that this like can take that's I think it was kind of formed more for people that don't identify with the word trauma as far as I can tell, and it can be an easier way to ease people into the topic. um, but I think just yeah, right way, wrong way. I think like again, right? It's all binary, but it comes into normativity, heteronormativity, and yeah, obviously the politicized nature of um, the trauma that's queer with it, of just how um, dehumanizing it can be, creating a dehumanized form of seeing the queer community and in general. That using the same bathroom or you know um, you know that there's groomers and pedophiles and witches and freaks and all these words and just like the dehumanizing nature, literally the word demonizing, like I mean that's just like what that's still a religious word. um so I don't know, that's my definition. That was about as neurodivergent, and I'll call it a jazz definition.
Like
um,
it.
with like a jazz beat to that, it's gonna be like, well, wow, that. Anyways, Melly, you go.
um yeah, that is there's really no easy way to answer that. Like, how would you define religious trauma? I guess my first step is how I would define trauma, which would be, too much, too quick, too soon, in such a way that the nervous system cannot stay regulated. And so, if that is how we would define trauma, then anything in a religious context that would be too much, too quick, too soon. I also kind of look at it as, anything that causes you to question your autonomy, your sense of safety, and your reality, which, we can kind of see that in like gaslighting, and that's where I think narcissistic abuse trauma and religious trauma can look very similar in someone that has had to survive either one or both. Um, and I think in that, and in questioning your reality or your perception of your own reality, um, in a like individualistic kind of way would be, for example, teaching children about hell and this terrifying, scary afterlife that we have no proof even exists, and using that to kind of scare them into being good or obeying or whatever, so it's kind of skewing their idea of reality, of the future, like it's sort of manipulating their behaviors in the present moment based on this fear of what could happen in the afterlife, right? And really, when you think about it, religion has been used not just individually like that, but we can scale it all the way out to politically. A lot of the laws that are in place, a lot of bills that are passing are being like, these things are coming about written by people that are saying, well, this is biblical, or this is how it's supposed to be, and they haven't even read the Bible, but they're using it as a weapon, as a tool to kind of control. And so, to think of it in that aspect, that would also mean, as a society, even if you were not raised in a religious household, you have been exposed to religious trauma in some aspect, because colonizers used Christianity to control other people and to excuse the violence that they were doing to other people, because, well, our God said so. It's okay for us to do this because, well, we got the Bible. And I think collectively, the trauma that still lingers from all of that, generation by generation, is also a thing. And that's where, again, like a lot of things like complex PTSD or generational trauma or ancestral trauma, it once you kind of throw out one of those terms, like religious trauma, there's all these others that can kind of follow it. And so it seems like it's this, it could be almost anything. I think that's why it's really hard to define it, is because there are so many other things out there that are very, very similar to it. And it isn't just one thing. Like I said earlier, it's not just one facet of your life. It's so many different facets of your life and your sense of self and your identity, that it's really hard to just pinpoint it down to just one thing or one experience or one part of yourself.
Good definitions.
I love that so much because ours are totally different too, and that I think that also speaks to it of like, wow, um, yeah, God, yeah, I love that. So I'm like, yeah, there's no way I'm gonna remember everything, or I'm gonna have, you know what I mean? And like, what even just with healing too, it's like we can't heal from everything all at once too, like with trauma. And I mean, I think that's also like defining it would also be like defining what does it look like to heal, and it's like that's so individual. And like, yeah, I mean, I think you're talking about like the, I don't know, I'm hearing Lord of the Rings music or something with the epicness of like the generational wounds of like, yeah, the Crusades all the way to the, I mean, I don't know, we can, and I do believe, I mean, this is not, um, scientific at the level, but Gabor Mate talks about the current geopolitical landscape of the generational trauma and how it's impacting the current, genocide in Palestine, and how we're looking at, people saying, I mean, on any level of saying, wow, I can't believe these people are so evil to kill all the Palestinians. And it's like, yeah, they're doing evil acts. But like, we're not going to be stupid and dehumanize them like that either. Like, that's the whole thing. They're dehumanizing the Palestinians, and we have to be able to be like, why? It's not that crazy. If you look at generational trauma, it's really not. It's like, this has never been healed. The 6 million Jews getting murdered and slaughtered and dehumanized for, and just living in constant fear, raising children, and then getting land was the healing. They got a piece of land. No one knew and how to do anything else at that time, and like, this sadly is the time that like is even, like, for anything else, it's like it's now available to heal from. But now we're seeing an incredible outplaying of an unresolved trauma is what I personally believe, and that's parroting Gabor Mate, who is much smarter than I am. And it just feels like that's, yeah, deeper human connection there of just like, how could this be possible? And yeah, unresolved trauma feels very much, and that I think it stakes a point of like resolution or definition of the gravity of unresolved trauma, and on the collective level, and like what we're seeing. I mean, it's still, on a different level. Yeah. Hundreds and hundreds of bills being attempted to be passed in every state by these big think tank groups that are all Christian nationalist groups. Alliance Defending Freedom and Family Research Council. I don't even know. I can't remember the other ones right now, but they've all banded together, and they're all like creating these super groups, and they're spending billions of dollars. I mean, it's millions and millions of dollars, trying to legislate away the ability for queer life to be in public, at least. But I mean, yeah, the level of, I do think it's coming from that sense of like God's journey. This is God's path. This is what God wants. We're going to pass God's will. And yeah, so that would be my direct trajectory personally, just like trying to go have maybe some form of psychological evidence or something that can debase these possible laws and find ways to fight that shit. I know the Satanic Temple, the non-religious political group, the Satanic Temple, secular group, does a lot of that. They'll go and fight religious oversight or whatever committees, and where they're trying to input a 10 Commandments in a school or at a courthouse, and they'll say, "We love that idea. We're also going to put a Baphomet statue in the courthouse." And they say, "What the fuck is that?" They say, "It's a demon. It's a demon statue. You want to put the 10 Commandments? We're going to put the demon statue in there too. We love religious freedom, and we want religion to be in the churches like you do." And that seems to have been like the most effective way. It's got a very like Cartoon Network vibe to it, I think, of like how the Roadrunner and stuff, like, like, or whatever. I can't think of it right now, but like, yeah. Which one would like Tom and Jerry, and they would like kiss him on the mouth and then run away or something? That's, which feels queer as fuck too. And I'm like, I love that. Like, just like kiss your enemy and then run away and they can't get you.
Yep.
I don't know. But yeah.
And then last question, since we're running a little bit low on time, how do you define self and spiritual/soul care, and how do you practice it?
I'll go first just to be quicker this time. I yeah. I definitely, like I said, I consider myself a Buddhist atheist personally, and that's just my own journey of um, faith versus belief. Something, this is like an Alan Watts um, philosophical thing, but anything that feels like faith is maybe more remember it going with the hypothesis to move toward into yourself and finding ways to do that. Heart practices and ways of yeah, holding space for pain. And that's been my journey there. And just like the belief would be like, I think he uses the ocean. He's like, belief is that the ocean is made of sand, or sorry, the ocean is made of fire or something. And it's like, okay, well, we don't know that. We don't know. But faith's like that the ocean is there. Like, well, I've seen the ocean. I definitely saw it. I know many others have seen it. There's pictures, there's videos, there's ways to connect to it, but I'm not there right now. So even like that with healing, of like having faith in healing at that level, it's like I'm not going to create some version of belief that like this is what healing looks like. Kind of like you mentioned, Melly, of like that this is the feeling you're going to wake up one day and be like, I don't even think that all this pain actually happened to me. Like it's never going to not have happened. It's never going to be a different person that you wake up as. Um, and yeah, but that sense of like healing is possible in me internally, and reaching those that positionality of like inner care, and just like, wow, there's this ability to care for parts of me that are wounded. There's this ability for yeah, holding space for the yeah, finding energetic conduits to like allow things to move, and some stuff shows up and it's there and then it moves, and like that's to me been the most healing piece of just like trying to remember that I have had healing occur and that it's possible. um yeah, yeah.
How about you, Millie?
Um, self-care and soul care. I would say a lot of things that have helped me have been like visualization and doing things with intention. Like for example, spiritual bathing, where like I'll use different herbs or even crystals and stuff in the bath water. And as I'm in the bath, I am visualizing in my mind the things that I want to let go of. Like I'm imagining these emotions or these past experiences, whatever, seeping out of my pores into the bathwater, and then I watch the bathwater go down the drain with everything I want to let go of going with it. Like really being very, very mindful, very present with that. And I think that too, mindfulness, kind of going through day-to-day life always in a mindful or as mindful as possible state has been very, very helpful. Um, and I think that also, on a spiritual or soul level, there is still a part of me that has what some would call faith, or I call, hope, or just connection to great spirit, like this idea that we are all connected, that feeling that we are all a part of the all, we are individual, but we are all the same too. Um, and so I sometimes will, remind myself, like, especially when things get really heavy. I can't remember exactly who it was that said this, but they had said, if the only thing that is left for me is to fall, then whomever I am meant to become is going to be there to catch me. And so ultimately, what's on the other side of this whole healing process and this whole journey is myself.
Mhm.
So the final destination isn't some afterlife or some higher power, it's me and who I'm meant to be. And so I'm ultimately just searching for myself.
Seems very deep and interpersonal. I like it.